Student redditors. What are the dumbest questions you've ever heard asked in class? They'll start. Story 1, learning about how reactive pure potassium is with water in high school chem. Students, so does that mean if I threw a banana in a pool, it would explode? Teacher, oh no, Ted, why don't you try it? Story 2, if you have a craving while pregnant, and don't eat what you're craving, will the baby have a birthmark the shape of the food? And when the teacher, barely controlling his laughter, told her that he didn't think so, no, it's true, my aunt craved grapes and didn't eat them, and my cousin has a birthmark that looks like grapes. Same girl if you drink water upside down. Want it go into your brain? 10th grade biology class. Story 3, a girl in one of my classes once asked straight-faced if there were any homeless people in the Middle Ages. When our professor answered absolutely yes, this girl then said, non-ironically, oh, I thought they all lived in castles. Thus began the most entertaining semester I've ever had. Story 4, in a high school science class. Serious question, how do the people on the bottom of the earth keep from, falling off? Longest, most awkward silence ever. Story 5, student, so there are like a lot of stars in the universe, right? Like millions? Teacher, yes. Student, so that means the universe is really big, like as big as the ocean. Edit astronomy class, senior year of high school. Story 6, in a high school government class. Probably sophomore year, we were looking at the big pulled-down world maps that every classroom has and talking about World War II. 5 girls in the back of the room had been talking amongst themselves before one of them finally asked our teacher, we ladies were wondering why Japan even bothered fighting the U.S., because it seems like it would take a lot of time to cross Europe to attack us, which isn't very smart. Our teacher had the most confused look on his face when he responded, the earth, it's round. Story 7, in 5th grade, we all were allowed to anonymously write down any ed questions we had in a shoebox, and they would be answered aloud. Best question ever, what are those pink things on your nipples? Story 8, when I was a HS sophomore, a fellow classmate pointed to the map of the U.S. near the front of the class and asked me what those islands in the box under California were. I stared back with a look of incredulity and answered Hawaii. It's worth noting that my high school is located in Honolulu. Story 9, in a physics class. So, electromagnetism. Could explain why my aura is powerful enough to sometimes turn off streetlights when I walk by them. In an advanced biopsych course. So if I die in a dream, I don't die in real life, right? Professor, why would you even think that? Well, it happens in the Matrix, and how do you know people who die in their sleep aren't just not waking up before they hit the ground in a dream? Later that lecture. Professor, it's actually an urban myth that waking up a sleepwalker will significantly traumatize them. Same guy stands up, bullshit. My baby sister died by being woken up while she was sleepwalking and stormed out of the lecture hall. Story 10, it wasn't a question, more an assertion in a third-year philosophy of mine class. I forget what the lecturer was actually trying to describe, but he ended with much like in a film, which is composed of hundreds of still frames in quick succession in order to give the impression of movement. A full third of the class adamantly disagreed with this fact, claiming that, sure, cartoons worked like that, but films were actually moving. I lost what shred of remaining faith I had in my classmates that day. Story 11, what class was this again? Said by some girl who dramatically stood up in the middle of the class 2 weeks into the course when she realized that she was in an applied linguistics course and not a history one. Story 12, 11th grade English class. Girl to the teacher, how old are your daughters? Teacher, 6 and 4. Girl, oh, you have twins. Teacher was dumbstruck. She was just dumb. Story 13, while discussing atmosphere or something of that nature in an Earth Space Science course sophomore year of HS. A notoriously ignorant girl asked our teacher, you know how astronauts walked on the moon? Yes, well, have they ever walked on the Earth? Silence as the teacher tried to comprehend WTF. She just asked. I don't quite remember how the question was resolved or how she explained it, as it was quite a few years ago, but the best explanation I can think of was that she was wondering if astronauts had walked on Earth's atmosphere, as in the outer layers of it. That's the most charitable interpretation I've been able to salvage from it. Edit word choice. Story 14, in grade 7, we were doing an assignment on adaptation. To illustrate the point, our science teacher had us draw a hawk and a duck on the whiteboard. After that was done, this one girl in my class raised her hand, and in all seriousness, told her teacher that ducks have 4 legs. We later convinced this girl that flamingos were poisonous, and that there were spiders the size of a car in Antarctica. Story 15, in my legal studies class in year 11. A guy in my class casually put up his hand and asked with all seriousness if someone drowns in the ocean. Can the ocean be trial for murder? There was no laughter for about a minute. There was just WTF faces everywhere. Story 16, girl asked why we have an oil pipeline to Alaska when we can freeze the oil, cut it into cubes, and ship in boxes. Also asked if the world got too heavy, would we go back in time? I had a full page of this kind of written in the back of one of my notebooks. Not sure if to laugh or weep. Story 17, I was sitting in a first-year university philosophy class. And our lecturer had just spent most of the class explaining Descartes and his ideas. Particularly, he was talking about how the world might not be real and could in fact be an illusion. He gave a couple of examples. You might just be a brain in a vat, or you could be stuck in a computer program, a la the Matrix. Then this girl raised her hand and asked in all seriousness, but what if your friends come and rescue you? Edit I or use apostrophe. Story 18. I thought I asked a dumb question. In 10th grade bio class, I asked my teacher, why don't things like my hands go through one another when I clap? Why don't solid objects pass through one another? What keeps them from doing so? My peers looked at me like I had two heads, and my professor had no idea how to answer. I was embarrassed. I didn't talk for the rest of that class. It wasn't until I took college physics did I learn that my question wasn't stupid, and in fact my question had a deeper answer than I imagined. Story 19, the best dumb question, was in one of my larger classes. An obvious question freshman took the time to get the professor's attention to ask the most important question of all time. Can I go use the bathroom? Story 20, what's a phallus? Don't you mean a penis? A phallus is a penis. At ISNT. Phallus is not a real word. Thank goodness I had a smartphone that let me Google things really fast to prove her wrong because she was set on trying to look like an idiot. Technically, it wasn't a question. ADM in college BTW. Story 21, one girl in a psych class I took asked if sleeping people could actually interact with each other and share dreams at will, like in the episode of SpongeBob. Story 22, I thought of another one. Senior English class, 6th period. Since it was in the afternoon, there was a guy, let's call him Jimmy, that would often come to class after having a few drinks at lunch. On this day, Jimmy was particularly saucy. We were given some sort of worksheet to fill out, and Jimmy looked confused, name and data. What's dot I? The word was date. Story 23, speaking as a high school science math tech teacher. I am incredibly grateful for questions like these. As crazy as these questions are, the person asking isn't the only one who doesn't get it. The person asking is the bravest person who doesn't get it. Story 24, in calculus class at the university. After having been through around 60 of the content of the entire course, a young girl decides to ask, when you say that A and B are variables, what exactly does that mean? Dead silence. Our lecturer was cool, though, and spent 20 minutes explaining it to her after class. Story 25, not a question, but in high school my English class was discussing offensive slang, and this self-righteous of a girl raises her, and it says, with complete conviction, calling people lame is just retarded. She looked so smug for at least 5 seconds before she realized. Story 26, 11th grade. Hot dumb girl in some form of social studies history. She's sitting next to a map of the world. We have been talking about Asian history for a month. Middle of class. Hot girl has her hand up. I might have missed when you told us this, but what country is Asia in? Story 27, discussing the French Revolution in a second-year university class. Specifically, the official abolition of the monarchy in September 1792. Dumb asked the professor. So, it's kind of weird how something like this happened in September, and the WTC thing happened in September as well. Do you think there is some correlation? Story 28, in America in the 60s, a 400-level history course. We were discussing the similarities between the Occupy movement and the counterculture that stuff the cops sprayed on the students. How do we know it wasn't Agent Orange? It looked orange to me. Story 29, not school, but stupid question nonetheless. I'm a backpacking guide. The night before my group was supposed to wake up to catch a 5 a.m. sunrise of the Grand Canyon. I was reminding them all how we'd need to leave at 4 a.m., make sure their cameras had batteries, and have their flashlights easily available for us to start our hike to the sunrise spot. One guy asked me, why do we need flashlights? Is it dark before sunrise? Story 31, wait, Christopher Reeves died from lung cancer, right? No, wait, John Wayne? No, John Wayne is still alive. He owns an airport in Orange County, too, so I don't understand why they call it the luck of the Irish. I mean, like they had the potato famine. Story 31, one time, I asked a teacher what World War I was called before World War II. The entire class had a mass freak out over my stupid question and responded with a resounding, it was called World War I. Duh. Story 32, on Friday, my teacher asked the class, this is in college, mind you, would you believe that Russia is in Asia? Yes, I would. I've seen a map. She then asked what other countries could be considered to be in Asia, to which a student responded, Greece. She didn't correct him. I have a sneaking suspicion this class is going to be easy. Story 33, a girl brought in a shark bone necklace, and I went, wait, sharks have bones. I meant to say, don't they have cartilage skeletons? Everyone started laughing. Story 34, world history class. At the end of a discussion on Buddha, okay, but when did he turn into a statue? I think everyone just kind of groaned for a minute afterwards. Story 35, in my college-level physics class, a student asked the professor, can astronauts move their pinkies in space? He thought that in order to move your fingers, they had to push off of the air around them. No air in space. Ergo, no movement. Story 36, 8th grade history. We were talking about Lincoln and how he was assassinated, and the one girl in the class goes, "Is he still alive?" We made fun of her up until senior year. Story 37, when I first got to the university I'm currently at, a very private school, girl asked me what was life like in a state school, as if it was similar to prison life. I told her we share one pencil per class, which made things extremely difficult, and she believed me. Story 38, this isn't really a question, but I feel like it fits in my communication lecture last year. Our professor asked us to give him examples of synergy in nature. This was during the part of the class about the big media corporations and how they promote each other. This guy that lived in the room next to me raised his hand and said mosquitoes and fireflies. The whole lecture hall of 300 or so laughed at him, and the professor asked him how those two were even connected. He said that fireflies light up the sky at night, so mosquitoes can find things to bite. The professor asked him where he learned that. He said common sense. Story 39, wait. Nonfiction is the not true one, right? This was an upper division English class. The class name was Writing Reflective Essays. My thought, yeah, I go to Arizona State. Story 40, last year, we had a speaker come to our school to talk to us about something. Does anyone actually pay attention? Anyways, she tells the whole school this story about how her daughter was killed in Africa, which was by far the most interesting and touching thing she'd said. So people started to pay attention. She tells us how the police found the people that killed her, and they were just a group of young kids. She realized that sending them to prison wouldn't accomplish anything except to destroy their lives, and that they still had long lives left to live. She believed they could live them better than they currently were. So she chose not to press charges and started a foundation to help troubled youth at this point. Everyone's dead quiet. We're all just quietly staring at her after she finishes the story. The lady starts to feel really awkward, not talking, being in a room with 600 other people. So she asks if anyone has any questions. A senior who had just transferred and stands up and yells down, "What gives you the right?" Really pissed off at the lady and tried to go on a mega rant about how wrong it was that this lady didn't follow the normal legal course of events before he got death stares from all 600 of us. TLDR, a super nice lady changed some troubled youth's lives, and a retarded senior was so angry that she didn't press charges. He went on a mega rant in front of the school and created a school meme. Story 41, college statistics course. A problem called for an ordering formula that was expressed 1-4-1, which parses to 1-1-2-3-4-1. The student at the board wrote just 4 and started to move on when this girl called out, "Wait, that's wrong. You forgot the ones. Professor, he doesn't need the ones." "Girl, why don't the ones count?" "Professor, we're multiplying." "Girl, but why do we need to multiply the ones?" "Professor, most of class." Girl's friend, "Yeah, it's definitely going to be the wrong answer if we don't use those." That was a really fun 10 minutes of discussion on the 1 times table that followed. Story 42, not sure if this counts, but in an Australian Year 10 English class, my teacher made a jab at Kevin Rudd, our previous prime minister, and a girl in the front row said, "Kevin Rudd, he's the king, right?" My immediate response was to yell out, "Nah, mate, he's the sultan." It was worth the attention. Edit minor spelling. Story 43, my college health class had some of the most remarkable questions from a guy who tried to play it off like he got laid every day. "Can you get pregnant from a toilet seat?" "I heard if you drink, it stays in your stomach for years. If you have standing up, can you still get pregnant then?" "What if she pushes it out?" "So wait, there was skin over my tube. What happened to it? You can't get pregnant from, right?" I missed this class. He provided me with quotes for months. Story 44, I forgot the question the girl asked, but she thought that people would actually have penis and vagina intercourse in movies during any scene. And no, she wasn't talking about pornos. Senior year in high school, some psychology class. Story 45, macroeconomics. My professor was leading a lecture about the Great Depression and the different economic theories being tossed around to solve the problems plaguing the United States, Keynesian, classical, etc. A student who did not have English as a second language towards the back raises his hand and asks in complete seriousness, "Is more poor people?" The professor sort of does a double take, apologizes, and asks if he could ask the question again. He repeats verbatim, "Is more poor people?" She stands there dumbfounded for a few seconds, replies yes, and then finishes the lecture. Story 46, last semester in my astrophysics class. We were watching a movie about Tycho Brahe, who lived hundreds of years ago. At some point during the movie, the girl in front of me leans over to the guy next to her and asks, "Was this made back then? Or is it just a re-enactment?" Also, while not all of them are questions, there was one girl in my high school Spanish class who just said the stupidest things. "Wait, you could put videos on a flash drive. I hate falafel. It tastes like dying people." This last one made me just sit there trying to comprehend what Shed just said and trying to formulate some kind of response. But there were so many things I wanted to say that I just sat there with a confused look on my face for a good minute. Story 47, a few freshman classes at a pretty rigorous engineering school. One year, a female student asked me a question during an exam in the CAD 3D modeling class. The prompt was to make a part twice the diameter of the part given. She wanted to know how she was supposed to find the new diameter when she was only given the radius of the first part. She started getting snippy and indignant with me when I told her I couldn't answer that question for her. I have to wonder how she even got a high enough SAT score to get into any college, let alone this one. Story 48, it wasn't a question, but we were in 7 geography, and we came into the subject of how Australia is the world's largest island. And then this one kid in my class puts up his hand and says, "No, miss, Tokyo is the world's largest island." He was dead serious, and I don't think he's ever really lived it down. Story 49, in 5th grade, getting to talk with a doctor there to answer our questions one kid raises and asks, "Do gay people go through puberty too?" The doctor looked at him with a passionate hatred and stated yes. No more questions. Story 50, in high school, we had a motivational speakers taking about how she had to deal with AIDS, how her son committed suicide after getting hooked on heroin, and how her daughter was also just coming of the addiction. One of my classmates asked if you could go back in time, how would things differently? Would you be a better mother? Story 51, girl sitting next to me in a multimedia class when she said we could have at most 5 layers. Does that mean at least 5? Me, no. It means you can't have more than 5. Oh, okay. Story 52, in my RE class. Out of the blue sea, the Nazis, they were Jewish, right upon being told no, they were not. She sat back and went, they were Catholic then. This was a Catholic high school that had taught the Holocaust at least once to her. Story 53, this is one you need computer science, or at least programming knowledge to understand. But it went like this in my college. Our very first introduction to computer science class was taught in Scheme, with the idea that it's a great way for us to learn computer science concept from a very do-it-yourself standpoint. In a language we were presented, recursion was the only way to tell the machine to repeat a set of instructions. There are no loops nor go-tos or anything like that, alas. Go-tos wouldn't even make sense in a functional language. So, seeing the importance of recursion, our professor dedicated an entire lecture explaining what recursion is and how to use it. After his explanation, a student raises his hand and says, in a matter-of-fact tone, my high school teacher told me that you should never have a function call itself. There's a long silence as the entirety of the class professor included is flabbergasted. Taking a moment to compose himself, the professor said, well, your high school teacher is full of something I shouldn't say. You can definitely have a function call itself. And as I have been explaining, it is the essence of recursion. Your high school teacher either didn't have the mental facility to understand or the knowledge of or thought that you didn't have the mental facility to understand recursion. Despite the inanity of the student's statement, the professor's response was so chock full of tongue-in-cheek insults that it made my day. P.S. There's a YouTube video capturing this event. I'm going to try digging it up. Story 54, in 10th grade biology. There was a girl who would say dumb things. I can't remember specific things she said, but my teacher would often answer all of her quotients or simply by saying, P-O-D-A-T-O. Story 55, word for word. I am still filled with rage. I saw this movie once where scientists carbon-dated sunbathing, and it turned out to be from 1,000,000 years in the future. Is that really possible? Story 56, when reviewing for the U.S. History AP exam. Classmate looking at key terms list weight, who is Dwight David Eisenhower, me trying to conceal my "Are you serious?" face among other things, the president from 1953 to 1961. Classmate, oh, okay, I've only reviewed through the end of World War II so far. Story 57, during human anatomy class, where does the penis bone attach to the pelvis? The instructor tried to act like it was a legitimate question because many other mammals do have genital bones, but we had just taken an exam on the other 200, so she should have known better. Story 58, an exceptionally dumb girl in high school asked what the difference between a boulder and a pineapple was. I guess she thought a boulder was a tropical fruit. Story 59, in high school history, what's democracy again? I've forgotten. My other personal favorite in Year 9 science is lockjaw, when your jaw locks up. Story 60, I know this is going to be buried, but if the sun is shining on one side of the earth, then what is going on the other side? It's nighttime. Story 61, well, I asked it in class to a classmate, so I guess it counts. I asked a classmate in my CCD Sunday school class in 7th grade if he was Jewish. It slipped my mind where I was. Luckily, it was such a stupid question, he laughed it off and told me I'm funny. Took me until he laughed to figure out WTF I had said. Story 62, you bastards would probably laugh at an overweight person on a treadmill too if I was trying to fix a gap in my knowledge and was ridiculed for doing so. I probably wouldn't want to try again. Story 63, every now and then, I'm lucky enough to teach a kindergarten or 1st grade class. Many of these children are natural-born scientists. Although heavy on the wonder side and light on skepticism, they're curious, intellectually vigorous, provocative, and insightful questions bubble out of them. They exhibit enormous enthusiasm. If asked follow-up questions, they've never heard of the notion of dumb question. But when I talk to high school seniors, I find something different. They memorize facts. By and large, though, the joy of discovery, the life behind those facts has gone out of them. They've lost much of the wonder and gained very little skepticism. They're worried about asking dumb questions. They're willing to accept inadequate answers. They don't pose follow-up questions. The room is awash with sidelong glances to judge, second by second, the approval of their peers. They come to class with their questions written out on pieces of paper, which they surreptitiously examine, waiting their turn and oblivious of whatever discussion their peers are at this moment engaged in. Something has happened between 1st and 12th grade, and it's not just puberty. I'd guess that it's partly peer pressure not to excel, except in sports, partly that the society teaches short-term gratification, partly the impression that science or mathematics won't buy you a sports car, partly that so little is expected of students, and partly that there are few rewards or role models for intelligent discussion of science and technology, or even for learning for its own sake. Those few who remain interested are vilified as nerds or geeks or grinds. But there's something else I find many adults are put off when young children pose scientific questions. Why is the moon round? The children ask. Why is grass green? What is a dream? How deep can you dig a hole? When is the world's birthday? Why do we have toes? Too many teachers and parents answer with irritation or ridicule, or quickly move on to something else. What did you expect the moon to be? Square. Children soon recognize that somehow this kind of question annoys the grown-ups. A few more experiences like it, and another child has been lost to science. Why adults should pretend omniscience before 6-year-olds, I can't for the life of me understand. What's wrong with admitting that we don't know something? Is our self-esteem so fragile? What's more, many of these questions go to deep issues in science, a few of which are not yet fully resolved. Why the moon is round has to do with the fact that gravity is a central force pulling towards the middle of any world, and with how strong rocks are. Grass is green because of the pigment chlorophyll, of course. We've all had that drummed into us by high schools. But why do plants have chlorophyll? It seems foolish, since the sun puts out its peak energy in the yellow and green part of the spectrum. Why should plants all over the world reject sunlight in its most abundant wavelengths? Maybe it's a frozen accident from the ancient history of life on Earth. But there's something we still don't understand about why grass is green. There are many better responses than making the child feel that asking deep questions constitutes a social blunder. If we have an idea of the answer, we can try to explain. Even an incomplete attempt constitutes a reassurance and encouragement. If we have no idea of the answer, we can go to the encyclopedia. If we don't have an encyclopedia, we could take the child to the library. Or we might say, I don't know the answer. Maybe no one knows. Maybe when you grow up, you'll be the first person to find out. There are naive questions, tedious questions, ill-phrased questions, questions put after inadequate self-criticism. But every question is a cry to understand the world. There is no such thing as a dumb question. Carl Sagan, The Demon-Haunted World, TLDR, a big U to all you in this thread. Story 64, astronomy class. So, I understand there's gravity, but how do the people on the bottom of the Earth stay on it? I just don't understand how they wouldn't fall off. Completely serious question posed by an older, non-traditional student. The professor just kind of stood there and looked at him. Story 65, high school English class. 1C, Amish people all the time. In LA, she meant Hasidic Jews, Amish versus Hasidic Jews. Story 66, as a teacher, I cling desperately to the old mantra that there are no dumb questions. I know these questions reveal that the person asking either has very limited knowledge or very strange ideas about the world, but how else are they going to learn the facts if they don't ask? Story 67, so, yesterday it's Reddit. Everyone has gaps in their common knowledge. What are some of yours? And today it's looked down on people who try to fill the gaps in their common knowledge. Story 68, I'm currently studying engineering. And one question I've heard posed to several guest lecturers is along the lines of, so when you're working, do you mainly work with theory and do technical things, or do you actually have to deal with other people? It's really quite ridiculous how socially inept a lot of engineering students are. Story 69, Professor, the test will be short answer. Student, does this mean you will be accepting more than one answer? Other student, will we need Scantron? Story 70, in math class math studies for any IB students, we ended up needing to add 1742. When one person said the answer to the teacher, the girl sitting next to them asked, how did you figure that out? With a genuine look of astonishment on her face, I have another one, though it's one I've heard from classmates. There's a girl in my grade who takes biology and chemistry higher level. One day, she asked the biology teacher, what is the difference between a cell and an atom? Story 71, during grade 10 history class, we were talking about World War II. Talking about both Japan and Germany confused one child so much he raised his hand and asked, wait, is Hitler Japanese? The class fell silent, and the teacher replied, Jesus, Tom, let your brain win the race. Don't just spew out stupid. I could barely contain myself. Story 72, in nursing school, while covering the male anatomy, a girl put up her hand and very seriously asked, does male whiten your teeth? The prof answered, no, you should not listen to everything your boyfriend tells you. Story 73, sophomore year in college, zoology class. The professor was discussing parthenogenesis, reproduction. He brought up to the point that, in some cases, a physical shock can cause the egg to start spontaneously dividing in some animals. After class, a group of us were gathered around waiting to talk to the professor. A rich sorority-type chick was talking to him with a very worried look on her face. She actually asked the professor if she could get pregnant from riding horses. Story 74, oh God. This makes me cringe of the sheer, I wouldn't say stupidity, but I don't really know what I'd say about it actually. When it was asked, I just was in awe of disbelief. Anyways, the story, we were in a history lesson during the Cold War, but we had some German exchange students over this term, and one of them joined our history group. Now, the girl who asked the question is seriously intelligent, but over the years I have known her about 8 years. She has asked some stupid questions, but I digress. We were talking to this exchange student about how she felt about people always associating the Nazis and Hitler with Germany, and just general stuff about German life and schooling. Then this girl pipes up with such a terrible and stupid question that to this day makes me cringe. In Germany, are you taught that Hitler was good? I just sat there in awe as this exchange burst into tears. I realize nobody will see this post, but it was a bad question to ask. Story 75, in my AP Anatomy and Physiology, a girl asked if you could get pregnant giving a. The teacher wouldn't answer, so I explained in detail that, no, you can't. And another girl called bullshit, she was a medical major, and said, what do you think flavor condoms are for? I faced palm hard that day. Why do people with cancer shave their heads? Story 76, how long do you have to die before being able to swim under islands? Actually thought islands were floating, probably going to get buried. In 10th grade in social studies class, a girl asked, did they have trees in the Stone Age? Story 77, I spent 10 minutes passionately trying to convince my entire class that there was in fact no actual butter in peanut butter. Everyone was against me, even the teacher. Story 78, this happened in university. One professor writes a date range on the board between the years 200 BC, 50 BC or something. Two guys next to me in a big lecture hall asked the professor why he had written the dates on the board backward. 3, professor draws his attention to the B, C, next to the dates. For guy doesn't get it, interrupts the lecture, and asks a question. 5, no, professor explains, people living before the year 0 didn't have 25 BC on their calendars. They didn't know that 0 was coming. 6, guy doesn't get it, interrupts lecture again. 7, professor draws a line on the board with a 0 in the middle and an arrow to indicate the direction of time, and tries to explain how the years would decrease numerically until you hit 0, then increase thereafter. 8, guy doesn't get it, interrupts lecture, and asks another question. The whole room is laughing at this point, like 300 students. 9, professor says he'll be happy to explain it afterwards. 10, guy tells me that professor sucks at teaching, drops the class. TLDR University, student couldn't figure out B, CAD, hilarity ensued. Story 79, this will undoubtedly get buried, but it trumps anything I could possibly have even thought of. My roommate just told me this as we read through the post. A Holocaust survivor visited his high school and gave a speech about her story, etc., etc. And at the end, when the floor was open for questions, someone legitimately asked, so, wait, if your entire family is dead, how do you celebrate Christmas? Story 80, my high school would sponsor a child going to school in Honduras by selling suckers during class to kids who wanted them. For one, the suckers were awesome, so they sold like crazy. One day, my Spanish class, a freshman and a sophomore at the time, asked how this works and why he needs money for school. My teacher explains that there are no public schools there, and school costs money and only goes until an equivalent of grade 6, and they go to school mainly to learn how to read, write, and communicate in general. So the girl asks this in a very serious tone, what do you mean learn to communicate? Do they not know how to talk or something? Story 81, in middle school. We were reviewing fractions after having spent an entire class on it. One kid waved his hand in the air and asked, why is 13 smaller than 12? I don't think that's right since 3 is bigger than 2. Story 82. Yeah, well, they said Twilight was the best. Who said that? The New York whatever said it, and so did Obama. Yeah, that guy, ha ha ha. We made that chick so mad she stormed out of class. It was brilliant. Story 83, freshman humanities were learning about the Bacchae And this girl gets up and asks the professors, have you watched True Blood Season 2? Because there's a lot in common with Euripides and True Blood. I think you should watch it. Story 84, hello there. I just want to share a thought people shouldn't ridicule and laugh at dumb guest irons. Even though you and all the people you know have had a chance to learn a piece of information, doesn't mean that everyone has. There are so many different people with different backgrounds that it is simply impossible, especially if parents have been lazy and previous education has been lacking. When a person asks a question, it is a request of information. The person wants to know more, to learn something new. Regardless of how dumb it may sound, you should answer and correct it to your best extent and in the most kind way possible, thus doing your own part in making the world a more intelligent place. If you laugh and ridicule the person, he or she becomes ashamed and, worst of all, might become afraid of asking questions, and thus unable to learn new information. Hating stupidity serves no other purpose than creating stupidity. Teaching and correcting misinformation in a kind way cures stupidity, spawns new questions, and makes the world a more intelligent place. TLDR, there is no such thing as a stupid question. Edit typo. Story 85 Ed, class, high school. During the Ask Any Question portion, a girl asked, why does taste so salty? This will probably get buried. But last year of school, this girl I know comes running up 5 minutes before she was taking a history test and asked me about Hitler's coup d'etat. She knew fuck all, so I gave her a 30-second rundown and mentioned how there was quite some right-wing sentiment in Munich at the time to take advantage of. She goes, what do you mean? So the Nazis were right-wing. The kicker is this was in Germany. We're both German, never felt so ashamed, and she now studies international relations.